When I needed a ride to my doctor's appointment, my daughter-in-law said, "You've had your years, let someone else live now." My son texted, "We're busy, maybe next week." As I sat at the clinic alone, I saw her post online, "Finally a day without grandpa drama." But she didn't expect who was sitting in that waiting room watching every move and preparing to. I was sitting in the stiff plastic chair of the clinic waiting room, hands clenched so tightly around my purse that my knuckles had gone white. The fluorescent lights made the whole place feel colder than it already was, the antiseptic smell cutting through the air like a knife. I glanced at my phone again, even though I knew the answer wouldn't change. My son's text still stared back at me, "We're busy, maybe next week." I felt it then, a mix of disbelief and that sharp, bitter sting of betrayal. I wasn't asking for much, just a ride to my doctor's appointment. A single, small favor, and I was told, in words both texted and spoken, that my time, my life, was inconvenient. My daughter-in-law, whom I had welcomed into my home years ago, had looked me square in the eye a week earlier and said, "You've had your years, let someone else live now. Let someone else live." Like I was already gone, like I was a shadow taking up space that belonged to younger bodies. I'd spent the drive that morning alone, scraping together every ounce of calm I had. I parked down the block from the clinic, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. The world had gone quiet except for my own heartbeat. I reminded myself I wasn't weak. I reminded myself I had built a life, raised a son, paid taxes, fought through illnesses, and handled losses that would have crushed a lesser person. I deserved this small courtesy. I deserved acknowledgement. But instead, here I was, abandoned, left to navigate an unfamiliar corridor of the hospital alone, feeling smaller with every step. Then I saw it, my stomach twisted into knots, a sudden cold surge of disbelief washing over me. My daughter-in-law's social media post lit up my phone like a neon sign in a dark alley. "Finally a day without grandpa drama." I stared at it, unable to breathe for a moment, the words carving into me deeper than any knife could. The audacity, the cruelty, she wasn't even subtle. She was celebrating my absence as if it were a personal victory. I felt rage simmering, the kind that makes your hands shake even when you're sitting still. But beneath it was something darker, a seed of resolve I hadn't felt in years. She thought she could humiliate me in public and I would wilt, that I would retreat quietly into the shadow she had cast for me. She didn't know the part of me that had spent decades handling adversity, the part that had survived betrayals worse than this. I looked around the waiting room. There were old magazines nobody read, a mother soothing a crying toddler, a man scrolling aimlessly through his phone. And then I noticed the vacant chair across from the reception desk, the perfect vantage point. If she thought this was just another ordinary day, she was wrong. She didn't realize that every casual glance she gave her phone, every smirk she felt comfortable posting online, every moment she assumed I wasn't watching, it was all being stored, filed away, and analyzed in a mind she had underestimated for far too long. By the time the nurse called my name, I wasn't just a patient. I was a storm quietly building, a presence she would come to regret underestimating. I slid my bag over my shoulder and walked toward the door, my pulse steadying, my eyes cold and focused. She had no idea what was coming, not a clue. And then, just as I was about to disappear into the hall, I saw her. Not online, not through the filtered lens of social media. Her hair pulled back in that smug, effortless bun she always wore, eyes darting through the waiting room, phone in hand, oblivious. Oblivious to the fact that her words, her actions, were about to meet someone who had nothing left to lose. She looked up, and for the first time that day, I smiled. The kind of smile that promised she wouldn't get away with this. The kind of smile that meant revenge was already beginning. I've never been one to ask for much, not from my family, not from anyone. I grew up in Cleveland, in a house where we scraped together everything we needed, and if we wanted more, we made it ourselves. My husband passed 10 years ago, and my son, Mark, who was only 12 at the time, became my world. I poured every ounce of energy into raising him, balancing 2 jobs just to make sure he had everything he needed and more. I wasn't perfect, but I was present. I sacrificed vacations, friendships, even nights of sleep, so he could have a stable home, a sense of security, and I did it with pride. Then came Emily. I thought I had a sense of people, that I could spot someone who genuinely cared for my son versus someone who just wanted a life built around his stability. Emily had charm, a polished smile, a laugh that made it easy to believe she was harmless. When she started dating Mark, I was cautiously optimistic. I wanted him to be happy, to have someone who complimented him, someone who would be part of the family, not just take a piece of it. I welcomed her into our home, invited her to family dinners, celebrated her birthdays, even helped her find jobs when she struggled after college. I gave her a hand, a heart, a place to belong. But it didn't take long to see cracks. Small ones at first, dismissive comments about my cooking, subtle eye rolls when I talked about Mark's achievements, passive-aggressive complaints about how much time we spent together. I brushed it off, told myself I was being sensitive, but then it escalated. She started undermining me in ways I couldn't ignore, criticizing the way I managed my household, suggesting I let go of responsibilities I had carried for decades, the unspoken message always clear: I was replaceable. I tried to talk to Mark about it, tried to explain what I was feeling without sounding petty, but Mark had a way of brushing me off, caught in the middle between his wife and his mother. "Mom, you're overreacting," he'd say. "Emily didn't mean it like that," but I wasn't overreacting. I saw it, I lived it. The truth was that Emily wanted control, and the easiest way to assert it was to push me out. She started rewriting family dynamics subtly, moving our get-togethers around her schedule, posting little digs on social media that she assumed I wouldn't see. And Mark, who I raised to think family came first, chose convenience over loyalty. Over the years, I began to notice patterns. Invitations disappearing from my inbox, phone calls ignored, my presence minimized whenever she was around. Even simple things like getting a ride to a doctor's appointment became inconvenient or burdensome. That day when she said I'd had my years, when Mark's text offered nothing but a vague postponement, it wasn't the first time, but it was the breaking point. She had crossed a line, publicly humiliated me, and Mark had silently consented. I realized then that this wasn't just about a ride. It was about power, about control, about who got to decide whose life mattered. Emily wasn't just dismissive, she was actively trying to erase me from my own family, to make me irrelevant. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped trying to rationalize, to forgive, to accept her behavior. I had spent decades being careful, being polite, being the good mother-in-law who never interfered too much. But that day, sitting alone in the clinic, seeing her gloating online, I understood something crucial. She thought she could humiliate me and I would vanish quietly. She didn't know me. She didn't know that I could wait, watch and plan, that I had survived worse than betrayal from a daughter-in-law, that I had a mind that didn't forget, didn't forgive easily, and didn't miss a single detail. And as I sat there, I made a decision. She had underestimated me. And that was the mistake she would regret. The first thing I did after leaving the clinic was go home, but not to sulk. I went to prepare. I opened my laptop, logged into every social media account I had, even the ones I rarely touched, and I started building a record. Screenshots of her posts, old messages where she subtly insulted me, tagged photos where she left me out on purpose. It all went into a single folder labeled Emily. I wasn't impulsive. I didn't want a moment of rage to cloud my judgment. I wanted a blueprint, a dossier I could use when the time came. Then I started watching, not stalking, not in the criminal sense, though I admit it felt close, but observing her patterns, the small habits she thought nobody noticed. Her favorite coffee shop at 8 a.m. every Saturday, how she bragged about the vacations she took with Mark while leaving me out, how she treated the delivery drivers, the cashiers, even our mutual friends, with the kind of subtle arrogance that makes everyone else feel small. Everything I noted became a piece of a larger plan. But I didn't stop at social media. I went into the real world. I called the local libraries, the community centers, and even the pharmacy where she picked up prescriptions. I wasn't prying for malicious intent. I was simply mapping her life, learning when she was available, when she would be alone, when she felt untouchable. Every time she posted a smug little update online, I logged it, noting the time, the tone, the angle. She was walking around thinking she was untouchable. She was wrong. I also started preparing myself physically. I wasn't planning a physical confrontation, at least not in the way most people think, but I needed presence, the kind that commands attention without a word. I started walking a little faster every day, standing taller, carrying myself like someone who belonged to the room, not someone who could be brushed aside. Every time I passed a mirror, I practiced the look I would give her when the moment came. Calm, collected, unwavering. A face that says, "I know everything you think you've hidden, and I've planned for it." The next escalation was subtle but critical, planting seeds of doubt in Mark's mind without tipping her off. I started leaving small notes, casual remarks about fairness, empathy, and respect. I shared articles about family loyalty and manipulation, innocuous enough to seem coincidental, but pointed enough that Mark began to notice the disparities between Emily's words and her actions. I needed him questioning, quietly, behind closed doors. I didn't want confrontation yet. I needed leverage. I needed control. Then came the breakthrough. One Saturday, Emily posted a photo of herself at a cafe, captioned, "Finally a day free from grandpa drama." My pulse went cold, but in the same moment I realized she had just handed me exactly what I needed. Public proof of her disdain, her arrogance, her cruel glee. It wasn't just private humiliation anymore, it was a window into her psyche. I knew her next moves would be predictable. I could anticipate her sense of security, the overconfidence that made her sloppy. I began to orchestrate small interventions, calling the cafe, pretending to be a customer with a delivery for Emily, leaving envelopes of information subtly in places she frequented, ensuring she would see I was aware of everything. Every small interaction became a test, every reaction noted. She didn't notice the pattern yet, she couldn't. Her smugness was blinding her to the fact that someone was building, preparing, watching. By the time I was ready to take the next step, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of power I hadn't realized I'd lost. I wasn't just a wronged mother-in-law, I was a strategist, a patient predator. Every insult, every dismissal, every social media post she thought was private amusement had been transformed into ammunition. And that's when I started envisioning the first act of real revenge, something she wouldn't see coming, something that would make her arrogance crumble. But I didn't rush. I waited, because the best revenge isn't impulsive, it's inevitable. And I knew exactly when it would begin. I never expected my first real break would come from Mark himself. I'd been so focused on Emily, on cataloguing her arrogance and plotting how to dismantle the fortress of her smug little life, that I didn't see him quietly shifting. A week after the grandpa drama post, Mark walked into my house unannounced. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to see him standing there, eyes avoiding mine, hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets like a teenager caught in trouble. "Mom, can we talk?" he said, voice low. He looked different, hesitant, tense, not the confident man I knew. I let him in, my pulse hammering. Part of me wanted to yell, to demand why he had abandoned me when I needed him most, but instead I listened. He sat down, wringing his hands, finally meeting my eyes. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten, he admitted. "Emily, she's been manipulating me. I didn't want to see it, and I don't know how to fix it." I froze for a moment, unsure if relief or rage should hit first. Relief because he finally saw her for who she was. Rage because it had taken my humiliation for him to open his eyes. "Manipulating you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, controlled. "Mark, I've been trying to tell you for years." And then came the part that nearly made me drop to the floor. Mark's phone buzzed on the coffee table and he hesitated before answering. "Emily." He glanced at the screen, then back at me, and for the first time he didn't shield her. He started, but stopped. His hands shook, he looked guilty, torn, trapped. Then he said something that made my blood run cold, and yet set the stage for the most unexpected advantage I'd ever get. "Mom, she's planning something big, and she wants you out of the picture completely. I think she'd do anything to make sure you can't interfere." It hit me like a punch to the chest. I had thought I was simply fighting for dignity, for respect, for the smallest sliver of consideration. But it wasn't just pride she was trying to steal, it was control. She was building a narrative, crafting a version of our family where I didn't exist. She wasn't subtle anymore. She was dangerous. I realized then that I had underestimated her, even with all my planning. She was clever, meticulous, and merciless. And that meant I had to elevate my game, become something more than a patient observer. I wasn't just cataloging slights now. I needed to anticipate her moves, stay one step ahead, and use her own overconfidence against her. Mark gave me a look I'd never seen before, fear, remorse, and a silent plea for guidance. "I don't know how to stop her," he whispered, "but I know I can't let her destroy you." That was the pivot I needed. I didn't just have my own motive anymore. I had an ally in the one person who had always sided, even if reluctantly, with Emily. That small crack in their alliance could be exploited. If I played my cards right, I could turn the entire household dynamic upside down without them realizing until it was too late. We spent hours that night reviewing her patterns, the posts, the subtle manipulations, everything she had done to isolate me and dominate the family narrative. Mark was finally listening, and I knew with cold clarity that this was the moment where the game changed. But the real shock came when Mark, almost apologetically, dropped a line I wasn't expecting at all. "Mom, there's something else. You need to see her email account. She's planning something illegal, something that could ruin her if it ever got out." My mind went blank. Illegal? Emily, the woman who always wore that perfect smile, who posted selfies and mock humility online, hiding behind the polished veneer, illegal. I stared at Mark, my pulse spiking. "Show me," I said, my voice steady, even as every nerve in my body screamed. He hesitated, then slid his phone across the table. My eyes widened as the first email appeared. And that's when I realized she hadn't just underestimated me, she had underestimated herself. She'd already built the trap, I just had to pull the trigger. I stared at the email and the world shrank down to the single glowing screen in front of me. Emily had made a critical mistake, one so big, so reckless, it could ruin her completely if anyone ever saw it. She'd been siphoning funds from the charity Mark and I had quietly supported for years, moving the money into an account under her name. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But I had spent years paying attention, and now I held the evidence. I didn't react immediately. There was no jumping up, no frantic confrontation. I sat back, fingers steepled, heart steady. This wasn't about exposing her in a moment of anger. This was about making her understand, finally, that I wasn't the powerless figure she had mocked online. I had the leverage. I had the power she had always assumed she possessed. The first step was strategy. I outlined everything she had done to isolate me, the posts, the messages, the manipulations, and I paired each one with a corresponding piece of evidence from the past, anything I had documented over the years. Every slight, every dismissal, every public humiliation became a weapon in my arsenal. I began to craft a careful timeline, showing not only what she had done, but also what she thought she could get away with. Every calculated insult, every smug post she thought I wouldn't see, it was all proof. Next, I started planning the sequence. I didn't want Mark involved too deeply, at least not until the very end. I needed him observing, yes, but I couldn't let him accidentally tip her off. I would control the flow, make the strikes precise, surgical. First, she would feel the subtle shifts, minor inconveniences, small but pointed reminders that she wasn't untouchable. Then, once she was destabilized, the real blow would land, the exposure of her theft, her manipulation, her cruelty. I wanted her to understand, viscerally, that underestimating me had been her biggest mistake. I also had to anticipate her defense. Emily was cunning, and she would try to redirect, deflect, maybe even gaslight. I prepared for every angle, corroborating documents, witness accounts from neighbors who had observed her demeaning behavior, screenshots she couldn't deny. I was building an airtight case, a network of proof that would hit her where it hurt the most, her control, her public image, and her relationship with Mark. But I didn't stop there. I began thinking about the psychological element. I wanted her to feel exposed, vulnerable, and trapped before the final act. I devised ways to subtly infiltrate her routines, her favorite cafe, her gym, her work contacts, small interactions that seemed coincidental but would unsettle her. A misplaced note here, a carefully worded email there, all calculated to create a sense that her perfect little world was unraveling. She would think it was luck, fate, maybe even paranoia. I would let her underestimate me one last time. By the end of the week, I had the entire plan mapped out. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't emotional. It was precise, deliberate, and merciless. I felt a clarity I hadn't felt in years, the kind of focus that only comes when someone has been systematically humiliated and finally decides they will not be ignored. And then, as I was reviewing the final steps, I received an unexpected message from Mark. Simple, 3 words: she knows. My stomach dropped. I had underestimated one variable, her awareness. Somewhere along the way, she had sensed the shift, the subtle observation, the invisible pressure. And now that meant I had to accelerate the timeline. My careful plan couldn't be leisurely anymore. I had to act before she could cover her tracks, before she could turn the tables. I leaned back in my chair, heart racing, mind calculating every possibility. The stakes had just escalated, and the margin for error was gone. And then I smiled, cold and deliberate. Because she didn't realize how far I was willing to go. Because she didn't realize that by the time she tried to strike, it would already be too late. She thought she was untouchable. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I woke up that morning with a sense of grim anticipation. Everything was set, the evidence, the minor destabilizations, the psychological pressure, but Emily's message had changed the pace. She knew I was watching. She knew I was planning. That should have been a problem, but it was. In fact, it made the next move even sweeter. I arrived at the cafe she frequented that afternoon, dressed deliberately casual so I would blend in. She was already there, sipping her overpriced latte, scrolling through her phone with that signature smirk of hers. But something was different. She was on edge. Her eyes darted constantly, and she clutched her phone a little too tightly. She knew I was coming, or at least that someone was onto her. The irony, she had no idea that I wanted her to know. I slipped into the chair across from her without making a sound. She looked up, startled, almost spilling her coffee. "What are you?" she started, but I cut her off with a calm, deliberate smile. "Emily," I said, just my voice, nothing more. But it carried the weight of years, the weight of every insult, every slight, every time she had mocked me in public. Her eyes widened, and I saw the first genuine flicker of fear. She thought she was playing a game, but she didn't realize I had rewritten the rules long before she even noticed. Then it happened, the twist I hadn't anticipated but turned to my advantage. She reached into her bag for something, and my heart sank for a second, thinking she might call for help or, God forbid, threaten me. But what she pulled out wasn't her phone. It was an envelope, thick and obviously important, stamped with a seal I recognized immediately: the bank. I froze, realizing that she had been making moves of her own while I was meticulously planning mine. Emily wasn't just reactive, she was proactive. She had discovered somehow that I had started piecing her theft together, and she had prepared her own contingency. This wasn't just a petty daughter-in-law. She was calculating, bold, and dangerous. My pulse jumped, adrenaline flooding my system. I had a choice: confront her now or wait. But then I saw it, the tiniest slip, the crack in her confident posture. She handed the envelope to me with a forced smile, saying, "I suppose you'd like to see this." Inside were several checks, unsigned and unprocessed, documents that would incriminate her if they ever went public. But alongside them was a note: "I know what you've been doing. I know you're planning something. Don't think I haven't noticed." For the first time, the hunter became the hunted, but only in appearance. I realized in that moment that the best way to win wasn't to confront her head-on. It was to let her think she had the upper hand, to let her believe she had seen through me, while secretly knowing that the envelope itself could be my ultimate tool. Every move she thought was defensive was now an opportunity I could exploit. She leaned back, smug again, eyes locked on me, waiting for me to react. But I smiled calmly, letting the silence stretch. I had anticipated this, even if I hadn't planned it. She had played her hand, thinking she had control, but she had actually handed me the final piece I needed for the most devastating strike. And then she said the words that sealed the next stage. "You know, Mom, maybe it's time you realized who really runs this family." I leaned forward just slightly, voice quiet but steady. "No, Emily, you just proved who underestimates the other." Her smirk faltered. She didn't realize yet that her own arrogance had handed me the exact leverage I needed to not just fight back, but to completely unravel the world she thought she controlled. And that's when I knew the next move would leave her exposed in a way she would never recover from. I had been waiting for years for this moment. And now, thanks to her own miscalculation, it had arrived. I sat in my car outside the cafe for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, mind racing. Emily had handed me the envelope herself. She thought it was a bluff, that she had cornered me, that she had control. But what she didn't understand, and what no one else had ever truly grasped, was why I was doing this. It wasn't about money or petty revenge for a single insult, or even the humiliation she'd publicly celebrated online. It was about something far deeper: respect, acknowledgement, and reclaiming the place in my family I had earned through decades of sacrifice. Every doctor's appointment she refused to drive me to, every holiday I'd been subtly excluded from, every finally a day without grandpa drama post, it all added up to one thing: erasure. She wasn't just dismissing me, she was trying to erase me, and that, I realized, I could not allow. I thought about my son Mark. He had been blind to her manipulations for too long, but now he was beginning to see. I had to make sure he truly understood the truth, not through my words, not through my complaints, but through actions that could not be denied. This wasn't just revenge for me, it was a revelation for him. I had to expose Emily in a way that would leave no room for doubt, that would force him to confront the reality he had been unwilling to see. And there was one more reason, the most personal and searing of all: pride. I had spent years bending, accommodating, forgiving, and quietly observing. I had been polite when I was ridiculed, calm when I was dismissed, and patient while my presence was minimized. But there is a breaking point for everyone, and Emily had crossed mine. Her arrogance, her cruelty, her belief that she could humiliate me and no one would care, that she could make me invisible and my concerns trivial, had lit a fire I couldn't extinguish with civility. I realized that all the small, calculated steps, the screenshots, the observations, the meticulous planning, were not enough unless they served a purpose that was undeniable. I had to deliver a message that couldn't be ignored. I was not weak. I was not irrelevant. I was not a footnote in the narrative she tried to write. I was the person who had given Mark his life, who had raised him, who had built a foundation she could never replicate, and I would not allow her to rewrite history for her convenience. And the moment crystallized when I thought of her smug little post at the clinic. Finally, a day without grandpa drama. The words had cut like a blade, but now they fueled something far more powerful than anger. They reminded me why I had to act, not impulsively, not for petty satisfaction, but with precision, with inevitability. She had shown the world the kind of person she was. She had revealed her arrogance, her cruelty, and her absolute conviction that she could get away with it. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted revelation. I wanted exposure. I wanted to flip the tables in such a way that she would not only lose the illusion of control, but also see the truth of her own miscalculation. The fact that she had underestimated me, underestimated my patience, underestimated my resolve. And as I stared at the envelope on my passenger seat, at the checks and documents she had handed me like a gift, I understood the final, brutal truth. She had already given me the weapon I needed. All that remained was for me to decide exactly how I would deliver the strike that would leave her exposed, humiliated, and powerless. And when I did, there would be no denying why. Because some lessons, once learned, cannot be forgotten. Because some betrayals demand justice in full. Because she had forced my hand. And I was ready to respond. I waited until the next Saturday, the day Emily always felt untouchable, sitting in her favorite cafe, bragging online about her freedom from grandpa drama. I didn't rush in immediately. Instead, I orchestrated a quiet, invisible campaign that would explode all at once. By now, I had all the proof I needed. The siphoned charity funds, screenshots of her social media humiliation posts, emails showing her deliberate manipulation of Mark, and witness accounts of her dismissive and cruel behavior toward me. Every piece of her carefully curated image could be shredded, exposed, and made undeniable. I started small. I sent anonymous tips to the charity's board, including copies of her transactions. They began reviewing the account immediately, unaware that the person reporting it was the very mother-in-law she had been mocking for years. Then I shared discreet screenshots and documents with a few key family members who had always been sympathetic to me, making sure Mark saw some of them, just enough to seed doubt without alerting Emily. She started noticing a subtle shift, colleagues asking pointed questions, her social media engagement dropping, her friends glancing at her with curiosity and judgment. She sensed the net closing, but she didn't know who had set it. Finally, I orchestrated the piece to raise a stance. I called the cafe ahead of time and arranged a coincidental meeting with the charity's auditor, someone Emily had worked closely with. I timed it perfectly, knowing she would be there at her usual hour. As she sat with her phone, smug and scrolling, the auditor approached her table. Their conversation was polite, clinical, but in those few minutes, every word she said, every detail she inadvertently revealed, was being recorded and documented. She realized too late that she was being scrutinized in front of witnesses. And then came the public exposure. I created a private online portal for Mark, his siblings and family friends, a place where all the evidence of Emily's actions could be seen at once. I sent a carefully crafted invitation to Mark, urging him to review it. The shock on his face when he saw everything laid bare was exquisite, the full picture of her manipulation, her cruelty, and her financial misconduct. Emily didn't see it coming. She was completely blindsided. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by panic, confusion, and a desperate scramble to explain herself. But it was too late. She had been caught in the very web she had tried to spin, and now everyone, including Mark, saw her exactly as she was, self-serving, cruel, and utterly reckless. The final blow was psychological. I didn't yell, I didn't confront her publicly. I let her anxiety and paranoia do the work. The whispers, the glances, the private confrontations with auditors and family members, she could feel the walls closing in. And the cruelest part, she realized too late that the person she had humiliated, dismissed, and mocked for years had orchestrated the entire takedown without anyone suspecting a thing. I had turned her own arrogance and carelessness into the weapon that destroyed her. Mark came to me later that evening, eyes wide with a mix of guilt and awe. "Mom, I didn't realize you did all this." I smiled quietly, the weight of years of neglect and humiliation lifting off my shoulders. "I didn't do it for you, Mark. I did it for me, and for anyone who thinks they can erase a person who refuses to be erased." Emily was never the same. She was forced to apologize quietly and publicly, and the charity recovered the stolen funds. Socially and within the family, she was sidelined, her reputation irreparably damaged. And I had reclaimed my place, not just in my son's life but in my own. I had turned humiliation into triumph, invisibility into power, and betrayal into justice. Sitting in my living room that night, I reflected on everything. Revenge isn't about rage. It's about precision, patience, and letting the person who wronged you fully comprehend the consequences of underestimating you. And Emily had learned, finally and fully, exactly why she should never have thought she could erase me. For the first time in years, I felt complete. I had won. Not with anger, not with force, but with calculated, undeniable, and utterly satisfying revenge. She had taken my dignity, I took everything else.